So I would like to welcome you to my presentation about the late Wittgenstein's work. It's the late Wittgenstein's work which is concerned mainly with the notion of the soul. And the notion of the soul is a part, so to speak, of Wittgenstein's argument against mentalism in the discussion of what inner processes do in the respect of constituting linguistic meaning in linguistic sentences. So, first of all, there is a sentence by the late Wittgenstein in the so-called second part of the philosophical investigations, which says that the human body is the best picture of the human soul. And this is, as I said, in his later philosophy, in the so-called second part of his main work, Philosophical Investigations, and the Philosophical Investigations were published in the year 1953, 2 years after Wittgenstein's death in 1951. So we have this sentence as a place to start from, so to speak, and the sentence is, the human body is the best picture of the human soul. And this is, of course, a bit surprising, because usually, especially in philosophy, we are really used to look at the deeper things, at the inner things, at the innermost things, and we are not satisfied, so to speak, to have just a superficial element of the outer outlook of our body. So it is the so-called second part, because today one mostly interprets Wittgenstein as having made considerations in the second part, which actually would not, concerning the development of the manuscript, belong to the main corpus of the work Philosophical Investigations itself, but would be about the philosophy of psychology mainly. So if I speak of the second part, I should say the so-called second part, because the second part was actually chosen and compiled and completed by the editors and not by Wittgenstein himself. Yeah. So heuristically, we assume a close connection concerning the topics treated in the passages of Part 2, because there too are connected to the varieties of language use and perception, and this, of course, is a connection between the Part 1, which actually is the body of the philosophical investigations, and then the so-called Part 2. So there is actually no longer an inner process constituting our language use. This is Wittgenstein's critique of mentalism, of course. What does it mean that the human body is the best picture of the human soul, and what is not meant by the sentence, because it can be easily misunderstood? So it presents a traditional philosophical problem not to be confused with emphatic existentialist thinking of the self. So it's not meant by the sentence that really everybody should look inside and that we look at the body and we have a faint impression of what the soul might be, via kind of a similar experience or so. But the self Wittgenstein is talking about is constituted by contingent ascriptions rather than inner processes constituting our language use. And the contingency of these ascriptions made to the human body is actually the contingency of the human vocabulary itself, so the contingency of language is implied. So the inner process is one great obstacle for modern philosophy of language, where the Cartesian dualistic view of the inner and the outer is no longer present. No, we don't have this Cartesian view anymore, we don't have the dualism anymore, but on the other hand, Wittgenstein still can differentiate between an inner realm and outer science, but of course it's not a simple case of behaviorism or so. It's not. So the soul, in other words, is the outcome of common attitudes. What is meant by that? The soul is not an abstract entity to be respected under all possible circumstances, and that is what can be quite irritating about Wittgenstein's view, which is rather unusual, especially unusual to the religious discourse. The soul is the outcome of common attitudes governing individual linguistic approaches to other individuals and vice versa. So you have an aspect of social philosophy in it, and of alter and ego really connecting itself in a social sphere, in a social realm, also in a spatial sense. So why is this so? The deepest feelings can be silenced by not reacting to them, and deep is the word expecting reactions of compassion and consolation. Yeah? The word soul has certain connotations. You can have a conceptual and linguistic analysis here. And of course, it is really close to a certain view of human beings who really need sometimes this compassion and a consolation, which has also philosophical implications. So where there are no common attitudes to expressions affirming their existence, they will gradually peter out, these feelings will peter out. The soul as an expression in language is meant by that, and it's underlined how important it is, so to speak, to presuppose the soul in a certain way of addressing other people linguistically. So Wittgenstein, on the one hand, stresses the non-mentalist understanding of the soul and of the inner realm in connection to the idea how language and linguistic meaning comes into being. And the second point is that our feelings have a public quality. There is something public about them. They're actually not private, because they are bound to the reactions and the behavior of others. So this petering out is known to be the consequence of a specific non-mentalist understanding of how linguistic meaning comes into being. Wittgenstein brought about, so to speak, he invented this idea. Wittgenstein's paragraphs in PI 2.4 refute the intuitive emphasis of the personal in contrast to the impersonal side of things. We tend to stress the personal side more when the soul is addressed, and this is simply a habit of ours. It's not something some person alone could decide. It's just the way how the soul was usually addressed in our society, no societal entity consisting of language users. But the soul as a philosophical entity becomes, in Wittgenstein's hands, also a realm of contra-intuitive emphasis on the public quality of feelings. And this, of course, is contra-intuitive, because what we learn about feelings, about our wishes, our dreams, is that they are private, that they're not told to everybody. Some people would go so far to say that these feelings would be kind of our possessions, that we possess our feelings, and others could really rob them from us and take them away from us if we make them public. So the idea is that there is kind of reverse in the idea how the words public and private are used here. Because what seemed to be private before Wittgenstein's inquiries was actually now not private anymore. And this, of course, belongs to the realm of the private language argument in the Philosophical Investigations Part 1, where he said there could be no private language, and this is what I just explained about the public nature of communication itself. So the public quality of feelings is one main characteristic of Wittgenstein's considerations concerning the soul. The attitudes of others have constituting powers to this entity, to the idea of a soul itself. These feelings are important because they sort our self-images into kinds of an ontological relativity we tend to forget, imagining us as agents of actions. But we are not only that. These actions are in fact connected to other people's perceptions. These are changeable, sometimes capricious, not always reliable. So if we are bound to other people's perceptions insofar as they constitute what cannot be constructed by ourselves, their different attitudes now gain a new quality. Attitudes are no doxa anymore, and doxa means just opinions far from the truth, far from the element of truth conditions. When attitudes are no doxa anymore, arbitrariness and lack of information in important fields of discourse are decreasing, because these two aspects, the lack of information and the lack of information and the arbitrariness in the discourse, were of course signs of the doxa attitude. So, what about this expression of Wittgenstein? Can we have the attitude and not the opinion that he has a soul? What is strange, what is questionable about the expression, I'm of the opinion that he has a soul? And Wittgenstein criticizes it. Wittgenstein in PI 2.4 says, I quote, "My attitude to him is an attitude towards a soul. I am not of the opinion that he has a soul," end of the quotation. The word opinion is not strong enough, so to speak, for indicating the responsibilities someone has when talking about or even judging others, when talking about or even judging others. The responsibility of the subject, of subjectivity, has to be respected more than it could be the case while simply exchanging opinions. note that sometimes the philosophical discourse is like that, if you think of the case of the doxa. So the notion of attitude itself undergoes a change in Wittgenstein's later philosophy. This change is connected with a serious perception of Alter being the owner of something fragile, not seeing only ego, but having an interdependence of the two categories. So, treating others as having a soul, what does it mean? To treat others like they should have a soul. Having a soul is fugitive. It depends on attitudes, those sometimes being decisions on how to treat others, not altering too often. Yeah, we have to rely on them. Why is, philosophically speaking, having an opinion about somebody's soul problematic? And I might add, having only an opinion. Because opinionating follows the logic of the marketplace, where reasons can only serve as reminders of actions for a certain time. Attitudes, so to speak, last longer. The action of treating someone as someone therefore needs something stable to make up for the fleeting quality of our opinions. Opinions, so to speak, are not enough in treating someone else as having a soul. If I only have the opinion that he or she has a soul, this could change way too easily. Yeah. So we need something stable to make up for this fleeting quality. So now I would like to introduce the other notion in the title of my talk, the picture. Yeah. What is the picture here about in this connection? Seeing pictures when looking at another person. Having a soul is not open to discussion. The discussion has to be closed, so to speak, before it begins, on a level as contingent as fundamental. This is where the notion of picture, indicated in the title of the talk, Pictures and Souls, comes into play. Pictures are not only universal tools of making images communicable, they are what we see when looking at another person, wondering how the opponent might feel in a situation of disappointment or happiness. Something is visible as something. This is Wittgenstein's seeing as, of course, the important notions of his later work about the aspect seeing. Something is visible as something, happiness, disappointment, grief, joy, revelation. You can put in all the feelings, of course. If this is so, two conditions have to be fulfilled. Two conditions. First, pictures reliable and expressive. We have two aspects of the picture which is topicalized here, reliability and expressiveness. Two conditions. The form of an expression is reliable and expressive at the same time. And this is very important, that we don't only have the expression, or that we should not only have the reliability without looking at the expression at all. Both parts, so to speak, have to interact in this definition. This is important to indicate a middle path between visibility and overexpressiveness. Overexpressiveness could ruin the picture, so to speak. The single perceptions need to be framed, a possible realm needs to be limited by contextualization. Pictures are meeting both requirements. They are reliable and expressive at the same time because their similarity-based attraction guides perception with reference to content. This is very important. That this picture-like quality of the soul's expression tells us about the other having a soul is not accidental. Pictures do not exercise truth criteria. It is not accidental because pictures are the essence of what we believe to be non-deceptive. Yeah? Belief in the picture, because the picture with its tradition of painting, of showing also a non-existing world, already contains a deceptive element, showing what is not existing, which yet has positive connotations. Art is not governed by truth criteria. Art is something different, and the deceptive element is something we accept or even expect. Yeah. So art, the picture, also the poem or writings in a broader, in a more general sense, have the quality of ruptures, turning points, revelation, the shock. Think of Walter Benjamin, for instance, in the early 20th century in Paris. Yeah, the shock, the streets of Paris, being crowded with people. or the suddenness. This is an important book by Karl-Heinz Bohrer. In German it's Plötzlichkeit, and you have it also in English. You can read it in English as suddenness, yeah, because this is one main characteristic of art in the time of modernity. So it is not accidental that these qualities are often considered to be the qualities of modernity, as I just said. Pictures can be seen firstly as actions, and then they have a certain reactive quality. I will explain this now. After having established the connection between expressions somebody can use as seeing a soul and the picture-like quality of the expression, I would like to take a look at two further aspects of the picture, namely pictures and actions, firstly, and secondly, pictures and reactions. So both are aspects indicating an underlying pragmatic tone of the issue. Yeah? If Wittgenstein is talking of the soul, it has not the linguistic religious meaning, the meaning of religious words or religious expressions. It doesn't have the connotations or the erotic sense of the word. The soul has now become, so to speak, a more public and a more pragmatic affair. This is, of course, something you have to get used to, the pragmatic tone. Then Wittgenstein gives an example, the example of the automaton, to explain what he's meaning by this more pragmatic tone. Pictures and actions. The first words of P.I. 24 set the problem of the soul as a problem of belief and disbelief. I quote, "I believe that he is suffering. Do I also believe that he isn't an automaton? It would go against the grain to use the word in both connections. Or is it like this? I believe that he is suffering, but am certain that he is not an automaton? Nonsense." Yeah, because this is not the way we are seeing it, and nobody of us will usually ask oneself if somebody I see in the street or in this room is perhaps an automaton. Yeah. It wouldn't come to my mind. It would be very strange, and Wittgenstein is very direct about this. He just says it's nonsense, just plain nonsense. Yeah, so the automaton cannot be touched by our conviction that something is the case. Yeah. Our perceptions would not matter. We don't doubt that the other is no automaton. We don't do that. Believing, knowing is, as far as we know from Wittgenstein's later work on certainty, edited by the trustees of his scientific legacy, of his Nachlass, the other side of doubting. Yeah? To say it again, knowing is the other side of doubting. This is what is Wittgenstein's later epistemology in uncertainty is about. Yeah? You can only know something where doubt is possible. This is the most important thing. You can only know something where doubt is possible. Fundamental aspects of life, so for example, the fact of time passes, yeah, cannot be doubted, so they cannot be known. A person doubting time as a concept defining us would, if he constantly repeated it with seriousness, not as a joke, yeah, would consider to be no member of human society, a social entity anymore. Our knowledge that someone is not an automaton is as simple as convincing, because we do not treat the other as such. This is the answer. We do not treat the other as if he were an automaton. So, mainly our actions are the reasons for somebody having a soul. Actions are conceding a soul. We have a net of perceptions action-based. Having a soul is not simply to be equated with consciousness, as Descartes did. See, for instance, for this discussion, Ilham Dillman, 1974, Wittgenstein on the Soul, in Understanding Wittgenstein, which was edited by Wese in the Macmillan in the year 1974. You have the reference on the slide. Distinctions, being treated as someone equipped with a soul, seem to be the result of being looked at in a certain way. The soul we have, it is not something we own, is action-based, yeah, conversation-based, based on guided perceptions, guided by what society thinks is right. Because these perceptions are actually no singularities, so to speak. They connect in a social way. These perceptions combine to build a net of convictions, which, after a process of normative play of testing them, leads to attitudes, not opinions, as we said, conceding a soul. So, attitudes and reliance, informative quality of pictures. An attitude which is bound to actions transforms conceding into acknowledging a soul. We do not only concede a soul, this is what opinions do, but we really acknowledge it with certain kind of more emphasis. Yeah. Someone is treated in a certain positive way after having conceded alter and ego share values, experiences, feelings, duties, and so on and so on. So furthermore, an attitude has the implication of entailing a stable behavior towards alter, saving him or her from sudden change of mood, weak-mindedness, disease-like uncertainty, and other things, so you have to rely on something. Yes, this is very important in Wittgenstein, this reliability of the things we can perceive. So one hidden equivalent to the word attitude is reliance. Reliance or reliability covers a certain time in which actions are taking place. It does not mean that there are no exceptions from the rule, because such infallibility were an idol not to be met by worldly speakers. Pictures are not infallible, but informative. So they're informative and they're connected to reactions as well, pictures and reactions. That someone is not an automaton can serve as an information only in very special circumstances, because mostly you have circumstances where you just would not need this information and where it actually was no information at all. It would not belong to the category of what we call information at all. Yeah. What information could it give him? Yeah, this is Wittgenstein's quotation, I quote, "And to whom would it be an information? To a human being who meets him in ordinary circumstances? What information could it give him? At the very most, that this man always behaves like a human being and not occasionally like a machine." Wow, this is really something new to us. I don't think so. I don't think that this is new to us. I will explain this later. The second question is rhetoric. The expression human being is written in italics. It seems to be not plausible that two of a kind should face such deep necessity of clarification in ordinary discourse. We don't face this necessity. So when pictures are showing the conditions of the soul, they can only do so because the readers of the picture of the soul are human beings perceiving the one showing the soul-like signs as signs of another human being. So to read the soul is to read, in modernity with the interpretation of Wittgenstein, is to read the soul-like signs. Reading the soul, expression behavior meets reaction behavior. This is kind of a description what happens when we are reading the soul in a more detailed way. The information of the sentence here is not an automaton, is not information about content only. We are not surprised that he is not an automaton if he is usually seen as a human being, but information about a formal prerequisite met by two speakers. So it's something different. Thus, actions implying a soul seem to be also reactions in a relation to the one showing his soul in bodily expression and the ones reading it. Yeah? Expression behavior and reaction behavior are closely connected, and they really have to be closely connected. If you have situations, for example, where somebody has a certain disease or psychic disability, then these two things cannot come together, and this is when misunderstandings are produced, or as Austin said, infelicities in language used. So this connection is confirmed by reading the soul. Being constituted by good actions shows that these acts of acknowledgement are not only a benign expression of humanity chosen by friendly speakers, but a necessity not open to discussion and choice. This is very important. It's not the idea of somebody in a certain moment, oh no, I will act like this, and in other moments I won't. It's just what we do. It's not open to discussion. Some conclusions now, under the title Seeing the Soul. What do we have to do to see the soul? The human body can only be the best picture of the human soul because we read this picture as a picture of a painter we trust, so to speak. The picture of the soul is a good side of imitatio, knowing the limits of imagination, where speakers try to meet the expectations of others. And in this case, it's a good thing. Seeing the soul is reacting appropriately, discerning and completing a pattern of social behavior. And pictures not being read, what about these pictures? No one reads, no one ever reads. Forgotten souls not seen, pictures not being read by others are no pictures anymore. There is a bit of esse percipi in the human body being a picture of the human soul. Our criteria in discerning others as relative to the perceptions governing our social connections, trusting speaker as, so to speak, means trusting in his ability to read our souls properly. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.